Our narrative is that we drove to Cleveland today and that we are here to do our first Ohio State Big Ten football show of the year. We have Bill Landis, who is 6'9".
6'5".
Ari, who is 5'3".
6 foot.
And I'm Doug Lesmerises. Thank you for joining us. We're here to talk Ohio State football. We're here to talk Big Ten football, and we're here to talk narrative, which is my least favorite word in sports, because narrative means that you disagree with common sense and common knowledge, and you think you know better than everybody else. And so people love to talk about the Big Ten narrative and how the Big Ten narrative is wrong. And so far, I think we're seeing that it's not a narrative, it's just what happens. The Big Ten is having a tough go again, and that included in Ohio Stadium on Saturday night, Ohio State, a 35-21 loser to Virginia Tech. They had issues on both sides of the ball. Their coaches have come back and talked this week that the Hokies surprised Ohio State on both sides of the ball. You know, we have a lot to talk about, but Bill, as we think about where Ohio State stands right now, where the Big Ten stands, but in particular the Buckeyes, like, should people be worried? Is Saturday not a big deal? What's your take on the narrative as it stands right now?
I'm not so sure that people should be worried about Ohio State as it pertains to their standing in the Big Ten. I think they should be worried about what they saw on the field and whether or not this team is as good as people thought it was coming into the season. But when you look at what happened at the Big Ten Saturday night, Michigan State goes to Oregon, blows a lead there. Michigan doesn't score against Notre Dame. Ohio State loses, yes, but I think when you look at the big picture of the Big Ten, I don't know how important that loss is in terms of where Ohio State stands. I think it's kind of still wide open. Ohio State can very much still win this thing if they turn some things around.
Ari, we talked to Urban Meyer yesterday in Columbus. We talked to Chris Ash. We talked to Stan Drayton. What kind of vibe did you get from the coaches coming back off that loss? What do you think they think of Ohio State right now, and what do you think of Ohio State right now?
Well, I want to say the word narrative too. And I think the narrative of what people thought about the Big Ten is true, because every single chance that the entire conference had to prove that they were good on a national level, including Ohio State, they failed to do so. But the narrative also pertains to Ohio State in the sense that people thought after the Navy game that it was just a tough win and Ohio State would be fine with the backup quarterback, their skill position players would be fine, their defense would clamp down with their new press coverage scheme designed by Chris Ash. So I think that there was a narrative of Ohio State is still great or very good, even though they probably weren't, as we found out on Saturday. Now, going back to your question, what did Chris Ash and Stan Drayton have to say? I was really surprised overall about how basically every single coach that we met with yesterday basically came out and said, hey, we weren't ready for this. Mm-hmm. We got out-coached. Our players were young. They didn't know how to adjust to it on the field. They continued saying that they fought hard, and that's fine. But I was surprised for the first time in my 6 years on this beat to have multiple coaches basically say, hey, we weren't ready for this schematically. I thought was a pretty big surprise.
Given all that, it's not over for Ohio State. It's not the end of the world. But this is a very interesting time, and this was a time that I was very curious about when it would happen and how people would react. I think we are at the end of the Urban Meyer honeymoon. 24-0 to start his career in Columbus, undefeated in 2012, undefeated in the regular season last year. They lose to Michigan State. They lose to Clemson. Things happen. Those are good teams. They come out, they lose Braxton Miller, their best player. They look not so great against Navy for 3 quarters, and now they lose. And now you are getting a little bit from the fan base of what's going on. Maybe this isn't perfect. Now, of course, there are a lot of overreactions in there. Urban Meyer is still a good football coach. This is still a good football team. But I think there are legitimate questions with this team. And the 24-0 is kind of gone. You know, we're sort of on the 1-3 right now, and there's a lot of time to recover, but there clearly are questions that need to be answered. This is not a fluke. That was not a fluke loss to Virginia Tech. There are some basic foundational things, including on the Ohio State offense. We'll start with that, Ari, as we try to break down the Buckeyes here. I know one thing you've been talking about a lot is the playmakers on this team. That game against Virginia Tech, Urban Meyer said, turned into a one-on-one game where you have to have guys who can make plays one-on-one. They did not make enough of them. Is that a problem that is going to be solved, or is that a problem that could continue for this Ohio State offense?
What I think is interesting is that I don't mean to keep going back to the Navy game, but even though J.T. Barrett finished 12 of 15 passing, I believe, were the stats in that game, and I think we got a sense that this was an issue in that game. So, there are a few shovel passes. The one deep bomb to Devin Smith in the Navy game was like a lot of people saying, well, hey, J.T. Barrett and these skill position players have arrived. But when I left the game, I had this overwhelming feeling that, hey, there wasn't anybody that can dynamically take over a game. So when you go a week later, the same things happen, and Virginia Tech saw what we saw on film, and they've been preparing for it all year. Make somebody beat you. And obviously that takes a little bit, it's a little harder for that to happen if your freshman quarterback's out there and it's not Braxton Miller. But even so, there was no separation. They said they took the slant away, they took the deep ball away, they took everything away.
Well, they didn't take the deep ball away, but Ohio State couldn't make a pay enough.
Couldn't make the pay. So, what is the solution to this? It's not just, well, Ohio State happened to just have a bad game with the skill position players, and they lost because nobody could make a play, and that's a fact. That's a real issue.
You could see the opportunities there. Michael Thomas scored on a 53-yard touchdown because he caught a pass, broke one tackle, and there was nobody else there. Devin Smith did get open for a deep ball because you beat one guy in coverage, and you have a chance to make a play. Corey Smith dropped a couple passes. That happens. He is a player who has never done it at this level before. He's a junior college transfer. He redshirted last season. It's not like, third-year Santonio Holmes dropped a pass out of nowhere. It's not, it wasn't like one play lost this game. But I think when you look at this offense, there are guys being put in prominent positions who just don't have experience there. And so if things don't go right, I don't know that you can be shocked about that. Bill, on the offensive line, I think that's true too. Now, you go back every week. I hope everyone is reading your rewatch segments. You're proving that you know football. You and I are still a little iffy on that. The offensive line, obviously Virginia Tech brought some very interesting blitzes constantly against the Buckeyes. Offensive line, a problem going forward, a one-time thing against Virginia Tech. What do you see with those guys right now?
I think it's a work in progress. Even against Navy, they had some issues, but 4 of the 5 guys there were seeing their first significant college football snaps. Against Virginia Tech, it was something that I'd imagine nobody on that offensive line had ever seen before. You're talking about 9 guys within 6 yards of the football in the backfield before J.T. Barrett even has a chance to hand the ball off. Now, that's not all on them. There's 5 of them. There's 9 guys coming. Basic math says you're not going to be able to block them all. So I think it's more it's a problem. Yeah, it's a problem. It was a problem the first 2 games. It's going to be an issue moving forward. I think that will start to mend itself as they get more games under their belt. But I think it's just a product of inexperience up front. I don't think it's a major cause for concern, particularly with Kent State coming in this weekend. But moving forward, things definitely need to get better. Urban Meyer said that even after Navy. He said it wasn't an Ohio State offensive line. 6 weeks from now, maybe it will be, but it's going to take a lot of learning to get to that point.
I talked to Jim Lachey just for a little bit on Monday, the Ohio State radio analyst, one of the best offensive linemen in Ohio State history, and he was just talking about the idea of that line is so young, you don't have the chance to say, hey, guys, they're doing this. Remember 2 years ago against Purdue, they tried this and we adjusted this way? There's not that institutional memory at a lot of places, but especially on that offensive line. So when Virginia Tech came out and showed something that they had not shown before, that Ohio State had not practiced, it was hard for those guys to adjust on the fly. So there were times, yeah, they got beat a couple times. But there were also times when there just were absolutely guys running free, and Ohio State didn't really seem to have an answer for that.
Well, I think that's, it's all one thing. You talk about the quarterback, the skill position players, the running back, offensive line, it's a huge thing. And we mentioned that Ohio State had opportunities to make plays in the deep passing game. But how does Devin Smith run downfield 50 yards and get open if J.T. Barrett's having a hard time being protected? And that was kind of what Stan Drayton talked about yesterday. And they couldn't establish a run game because they were stacking the box. So, for the first time in, at least the last year, Ohio State had things taken away and the defense dictated to them what they were going to do. and they weren't, as a result, able to do anything, where last year they could have just gotten 6.8 yards a carry no matter what they threw at them and then made plays. So, the offensive line is clearly an important piece to the puzzle, and it has an effect on everything they do. And when you put pressure on J.T. Barrett, you put pressure on skill position players like Corey Smith that have no experience. They were supposed to be lifted up by Braxton, and Braxton's presence, if he were still healthy, was supposed to aid that. But now that there's pressure on everybody, it's just going to be tougher for them to move the ball.
We did see Braxton Miller on Saturday, looking good in a blue suit, hanging out. You look better. I don't think we can even debate that.
Yeah, no, I know.
J.T. Barrett is the guy now. He is 21 for 44 for 445 yards in his first 2 starts. He's thrown 3 touchdowns. He's thrown 4 picks. He's been sacked 8 times. He's rushed for 120 yards. He's had good. He's had bad. I think one thing that we can all agree on is he is not Braxton Miller. And I think that you can agree that Braxton Miller would be helping this offense right now. And the problems that are showing up doesn't mean they would go away. Braxton Miller, however, is the ultimate bailout. There were times, even with a good line last year. Now, he's not a great scrambler. We've talked about that. He's not a great scrambler. A lot of his plays are off called runs. But boy, when you call runs for him, does it put a defense back on its heels? And even though J.T. Barrett ran pretty well at times, there were times when it looked like, boy, J.T. Barrett just got 20 yards on that play. Boy, maybe Braxton might have gotten 80. Braxton, if J.T. gets 10, maybe Braxton would have gotten 30. Now, and this is not really about J.T. Barrett. It's about the situation that has been created by Braxton Miller's injury. But the reality is, he was 12 of 15 against Navy, and several of those passes were basically jet sweep handoffs that they call passes because he throws it 3 inches forward. He was 9 for 29 against Virginia Tech. Take away all the things that are happening. You have to take a lot of deep shots. Those are risky. He didn't do a lot in the middle of the field. The jet sweep really disappeared.
Yeah.
9 of 29 is not going to get it done. What's your take right now, Ari, on J.T. Barrett? And I think most people who have talked to J.T. Barrett think he's going to be a good player. Seems like a nice young man. I think he's in a tough spot right now.
Well, we can't. I mean, we're making the comparison to Braxton because that's what we've known for the past 3 years. And the question I like to think of is, would Braxton Miller, who was a freak athlete 3 years ago as a freshman, won that game? And the answer is probably no. So, or at least in my mind, because I remember what it was like for him at Miami, and maybe
would Braxton Miller, as a freshman, Braxton Miller have won the Virginia Tech game?
Because
I agree with that. He would probably not. As a freshman, no.
So, when you take a look at J.T. Barrett, he's not as dynamic of an athlete as him, but he's also in the same situation that Braxton looked really shaky in himself. So what I think about J.T. Barrett right now is I think that he's an athlete and he has talent that can manifest into something special one day, but I don't think that he can do it on his own. And right now, unless you have other people that are, I've said this a million times, that can lift him up, and maybe Corey Smith makes that touchdown pass, and all of a sudden J.T. Barrett gets him. You need that stuff to happen for a young guy who's playing his first night game and his first home game. So what I think is Ohio State can move the ball, and Ohio State can be a dangerous team to the defenses they face this year, but it's not going to be because of only him. It's going to have to be because the offensive line gets better, as Bill said could happen. It's going to be because Corey Smith catches that pass next time it comes to him, or Dontre. And we've talked about, the thing that they've talked about so much is who can take a 7-yard pass and turn it into an 80-yard game. All of a sudden, a quarterback that's in an offense that has that is a completely different player. So, long story short, I think he's a talented young player, but I don't think that he has the tools at this point to be all that Ohio State needs to get the job done.
The guy who probably on this roster is most likely to turn a 3-yard pass into an 80-yard gain is Dontre Wilson, had 3 touches against Virginia Tech. Bill, when you go back and when you rewatch this game and you looked at what J.T. Barrett did you think that in the moment, given what was happening to him, did he make the right decisions? Did he make the right kind of plays? Did he make the right kind of throws a decent amount of the time and it didn't work out? Or did you see opportunities where maybe he had a chance there and he missed something?
I think sometimes he did make the right decisions, and when you're a first-year quarterback making your second start in front of 107,000 people against a defense that you've never seen before, I think you have to kind of take the good with the bad when you're talking about a freshman quarterback. Some of the things that I did saw, particularly on the design runs, some read options that he kept, I thought he could have given off, and maybe they would have gotten a little more out of it. Some of the throws he made, I mean, the interceptions, a couple of them were kind of desperation heaves where he thought the receiver was going one way and the receiver went the other way. But the deep ball I thought looked better than it did against Navy for the most part. The intermediate throws, I mean, they're tough to make when you have 8 guys bearing down on you and your offensive line can't block anybody and your running backs can't block anybody.
The one thing I want to add, and I think that there is such thing as the it factor when you're talking about a quarterback.
It's like kind of what you have.
Yeah, like the Wasserman factor, but it's more of the it. But what I'm saying is Ohio State had the ball 3 different times in the fourth quarter down by 7. And it's not JT Barrett's fault that they didn't score any of those 3 times. But JT Barrett, at the biggest stage and the biggest moment of his career, and biggest moment of his life maybe, they didn't get the job done. And it wasn't that they didn't get the job done, they didn't move the ball. They didn't get to the 30 and then fumble it, or, you know. So to me, you also have to take into consideration that this is a work in progress. It's not Ohio State had a bad game and they are more talented and deeper, like they've been so many times in the past, and then got it done at the end. This is a fundamental issue offensively, not only with the quarterback, but the entire unit as a whole. It wasn't something they needed to snap out of. It's something they need to get better from.
I think there's a chance that this team could get a lot better in the second half of the year. We said before the year, if you're going to get them early, which is why before the season you picked them to lose to Virginia Tech, and you picked it again last week. Before the season, I picked them to lose to Cincinnati. Cincinnati hasn't played yet. We'll have to see if that looks like a reasonable thing, a reasonable worry in a couple weeks. Get them early because obviously Barrett's going to get better. Obviously the line's going to get better. But you can't deny they're young and inexperienced in key spots. The defense, though, especially that defensive line, you would think maybe they could bail them out here and there. And so I think there were moments with the defense now to give up all those third down throws early in the game. And I thought the most telling thing was the offense drives down, scores, ties it at 21, gains a little momentum back, and then just like in the Big Ten title game when Ohio State had fought back against Michigan State last year, the defense gives it up right away again. Ohio State kicks the kickoff out of bounds. They get the ball to 35, march down the field, and take the lead back at 28-21. You would hope that's where a great defense gets a stop. That was the most crucial drive of the game. Bill, you've written a lot about this pass defense. I think there's a lot of things there. With the pass defense specifically, whether it was on that drive or any other part of the game, is this the pass defense that was talked about so much of the offseason, or did this look like a pass defense that still was playing soft and giving up too many big throws?
I think it's more of a defense that was still playing soft, and I think that's really a product of the fact that they open with Navy. You can't play traditional defense against Navy. Virginia Tech comes in. Virginia Tech is probably a little bit better than Ohio State anticipated. Michael Brewer especially, the quarterback. So I don't think this secondary was quite ready to go full bore into this new defense. Tyvis Powell said it on Monday. They only ran about 4 coverages. He said it might have even been less than that. So I think the defense is kind of still vanilla at this point. I don't think Chris Ash has had the time to get his scheme fully implemented. And as we move forward, I think it's another thing, and it's kind of been the theme of what we talked about this entire show, is it's going to take time. It's going to be a work in progress. These guys are going to have to get more used to covering guys one-on-one, being more aggressive, getting up in their face, not backing off 8 yards on a 3rd and 17 and allowing Virginia Tech to convert from its own end zone. That kind of thing can't happen against a team like Virginia Tech. It can't happen moving forward. So I think it's just a matter of these young guys getting used to playing in this system, getting used to playing football a different way than probably they played it before.
The one part of that defense that is not inexperienced is the defensive line. That line will get better this week against Kent State. Noah Spence, who is finishing off his suspension from last year by sitting out the first 2 games of this season, will be back on Saturday for the noon kickoff against Kent State. That should give you 4 very good defensive linemen. That line did not save the day. That line did not save the day against Virginia Tech. They got some pressure at times. They missed some opportunities. Luke Fickell, after that game, was talking about the times when they let Brewer escape. They didn't make the big sacks they could have made at certain times. When you look at that line, I mean, it certainly looks like that still is the thing that you would point to as the best part of this Ohio State team. Should more be expected of that defensive line right now?
It is the best thing on this team. I mean, it's not a question. I don't know. I mean, people think it's the best defensive line in the country.
Right.
Is the question.
That's what people said before the year.
Does that still exist? I mean, it's kind of hard. I can't wait to see what it might look like when Noah Spence returns from his 2-game suspension, and then you have guys like Joey Bosa and Spence coming at it from both angles on both sides. So, but did we see the dynamic playmaking ability, the breaking into the backfield, forcing fumbles, sacks?
We saw it once.
We did.
Bosa forced that big fumble, but did we see it enough?
You know, I don't think we did. I mean, how many times can a team convert long third downs, as Bill was saying, without, I mean, Ohio State more than ever needs their defensive line to be the ones that pressure even outside the blitz. So I actually was impressed with the way the linebackers played, and, you know, there's some breakdowns in the secondary, but I think we expected them to change games and for us to feel it, to feel their presence out there, and I'm not sure that we really did.
Not on a consistent basis. They did talk about, there were a couple plays where, you know, pressure's one thing. You got to do something with the pressure. If you get pressure and lose contain, which there was a couple plays where they really pointed out, they had the quarterback there, and all of a sudden he breaks free because a guy blows his assignment, lets him out of the pocket. Pressure is nice, but then Michael Brewer's making a play off that pressure. Issues for Ohio State, but everything Ohio State does matters in the context of the Big Ten. As we go forward, the question will be who in the Big Ten can make Ohio State pay if they are not a perfect team, which is a very valid question, which is why I think 10-2, as we predicted before the year, is certainly not out of the question. I don't know who in the Big Ten is going to make them pay, but very good news for one Big Ten team this week. Penn State is back. Bill, what happened and what does it mean?
So the NCAA yesterday announced that Penn State is eligible for postseason play immediately. This season they can play for a Big Ten championship, they can play for a bowl bid, they can play for a college football playoff spot, although that's most likely not going to happen. Also, they get their full complement of scholarships returned for 2015. They were originally supposed to have 65 scholarships for 4 years on the original sanctions. The NCAA lessened that a little bit last year, and now 2015, full recruiting class for James Franklin, which is huge, and I think Ari will touch on that in a second. But what it means is that Penn State now has something to play for. Ohio State goes into Penn State October 25th for a night game at Beaver Stadium. Originally, that would be a good atmosphere. Penn State, Ohio State always is. But now that this game has more meaning to it, assuming that both teams aren't a complete train wreck leading up to that point, and it's very possible that both teams are 5-1 or maybe 4-2 heading into that game. So it still should carry big implications for the Big Ten East Division race, and really has a ripple effect throughout the rest of the conference when you talk about what we talked about at the top with Michigan State losing and Michigan losing. Right now, Penn State, Maryland, and Rutgers are the top 3 teams in the Big Ten East Division at 2-0.
There are still holes in this Penn State roster right now because this is the year when people felt like they would feel those sanctions the most. So they're not, you know, they don't get to throw guys on the team next week. There are still holes on this team right now. I don't think anybody is saying that Penn State is the favorite to win the East all of a sudden. But I don't think you can discount the motivational lift that you get. I mean, hope is a thing. Just like hope in Cleveland is a thing with Johnny Manziel and LeBron and Kevin Love or whatever. You know, they don't have LeBron and Kevin Love, but hope matters. Penn State has some hope right now. And going forward, James Franklin is going to have a full complement of scholarships to work with.
You know, what I'm most curious, I mean, that's going to be huge because James Franklin, we've written a few times now. He's
your boy.
Yeah. He liked my shirt.
Was it this shirt that he liked?
No. I mean, they're all pretty perfect, but it wasn't this one. But I'll be interested to find out. I'm going to call into the conference call and ask him this question. But now that I think they were supposed to have 80 scholarships next year, and now they've got 85. So that's 5 more. And if you've ever heard Urban Meyer talk, James Franklin even touched on this at Big Ten Media Day about how every scholarship counts. Adding 5 more to this class at the way that they've been recruiting could be a huge, huge boost because the infusion of young talent on a roster sometimes not only provides depth but can lift the team up. So I'm curious to find out if that's going to change the way they approach things because, as you know, coaches kind of map out, we need four offensive linemen, a quarterback, a running back, and maybe that changes when you can't take as many. Maybe they'll be able to have some more luxury, and maybe it'll change a little bit with the way that they're going to approach. But James Franklin has beaten Ohio State on 3 kids already in this 2015 class. So it's not like even when they were, handicapped by these sanctions, they weren't not doing well. Mm-hmm. So now that he has a full class, Penn State now is going to become a recruiting adversary even more so than they already were, which means that Ohio State really needs to, be aware of that presence because James Franklin's strong in that area, and now he's got all those bullets, he has all the spots now.
And we know, recruiting is one thing. You got to turn it into production on the field. Brady Hoke's recruited pretty well. Mm-hmm. We see what's happening at Michigan. Penn State's got to win some games. They've got to do better than what they showed against Akron last week. And that could start right now. Big Ten play is here. First Big Ten game of the season. Penn State and Rutgers play on Saturday, and I think they're already getting some stuff going there. I think Kurt Flood, the Rutgers coach, won't call them Penn State. How about that, Rutgers? He calls them. I think he calls them that school in Pennsylvania.
That's right. Yeah,
Rutgers is 2-0. They're feeling their oats. Guys like me, we're making fun of them for being in the Big Ten. They think they are ready to take this conference by storm. That is actually not even a joke. That is a sort of significant game this week. As much disarray as the Big Ten is in, Rutgers, Penn State, you're going to be tuned in. That's going to be that's a huge, okay, it's not huge, but it's an interesting game.
So I thought we were getting a little carried away there.
I'm telling you, man, in the Big Ten these days, you got to take what you can get.
Yeah.
Let me run down the best Big Ten games this week. I wrote them down. West Virginia at Maryland. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Iowa State, Iowa. Mm-hmm. Minnesota at TCU. It's a big, you like that one. Illinois at Washington is exciting. And Nebraska at Fresno State, which goes to show why it matters when you lose to Oregon, you lose to Virginia Tech, you lose to Notre Dame last week. Wisconsin loses to LSU in the first weekend of the season when they had a lead at halftime. The Big Ten, I think, plans to schedule better, needs to schedule better. Right now, the 4 best chances to win big games are already gone, and they are 0-4. And so maybe if Illinois wins at Washington, the Big Ten will be saved. Tim Beckman, it's all on him.
It's over, man.
An interesting season ahead. I think people can maybe read us sometimes as maybe too negative, too critical. I think we're trying to give a realistic assessment of this team right now. All is certainly not lost. There are things still out there. There are real questions on this team that people should have seen before the season started, and certainly were shown to exist in that loss to Virginia Tech. So we appreciate everyone watching today. Our first live show of the season. Bill will continue to grow. He'll be 7'2" by the time we come back next week. For Ohio Wasserman, for Bill Landis, I'm Doug Lesmerises. Thank you for watching here at cleveland.com.